I was 22 and living in a mid-sized city, working a server job that kept me out late most nights. I didn't have a car at the time, so Uber was basically my only way home after closing shifts, and I probably took one 3 or 4 nights a week without a second thought. This particular night, I got off work around 1:30 a.m. It had been a slow, exhausting shift, and I just wanted to get home and sleep. I opened the app, requested a ride, and within a few minutes a car pulled up. The driver's profile showed a 4.9 rating, which is normally more than enough to make me feel comfortable getting in without thinking twice. The driver was a man who looked to be in his 40s, quiet, polite when I got in. He confirmed my name and my destination, and I settled into the back seat, scrolling through my phone, not paying much attention to the route. About 5 minutes into the ride, I glanced up and noticed we'd turned onto a road I didn't recognize. I wasn't overly familiar with every street in the city, so I didn't think much of it at first. A lot of drivers take slightly different routes than the app suggests. I checked the app's live tracking, and the little car icon was clearly off the suggested blue route line, moving instead down a road that curved away from my neighborhood entirely. I told myself I was probably overthinking it. A few more minutes passed, and the streets outside got noticeably darker. Fewer streetlights, fewer other cars, buildings that looked more industrial than residential. I felt my stomach tighten a little, but I told myself to stay calm and just watch the situation for another minute or two. I finally spoke up and asked the driver if he was taking a different route on purpose. He didn't answer right away, which felt like it lasted much longer than it probably did. When he finally responded, he just said, "Road's closed up ahead, taking the long way," in a flat tone that didn't match the casualness of what he was saying. I looked back at the app. There was no indication of a road closure anywhere near our current location, and the estimated arrival time had jumped from 18 minutes to almost 40. I asked him again, more directly this time, if he could just follow the app's directions instead. He said, "Almost there," without actually changing course. At that point, my hands were shaking a little as I quietly texted my roommate the trip details from the app, along with the driver's name and license plate, just in case. We passed a closed gas station, completely dark, no other cars on the road at this point at all. At this point, I asked him one more time, firmly, to pull over and let me out. He didn't respond verbally this time. Instead, he slowed the car slightly, which for a moment I thought meant he was actually going to stop. Instead, he turned down an even narrower side street, one that didn't appear to lead anywhere but toward a stretch of abandoned-looking warehouses. That's when I stopped being polite about it. I told him loudly that he needed to stop the car immediately, or I was calling the police. He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and for the first time all ride, made direct eye contact for what felt like several seconds too long. He didn't say anything, but he did finally slow the car to a stop on the side of the narrow street. Immediately, I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my bag, opened the door, and got out immediately, standing on the sidewalk while I called 911. The driver didn't get out of the car or say anything else. He just sat there for what felt like an uncomfortably long moment, watching me through the window, before finally pulling away and driving off in the direction we'd come from. A police unit arrived about 10 minutes later. I gave them the trip details, the driver's name, license plate, and the route history from the app. They took a report and told me they'd look into it, though they mentioned it might be difficult to determine intent since he technically hadn't done anything they could immediately charge him with. I reported the incident to Uber as well. I never heard back with any real explanation, only a generic message saying they'd taken appropriate action on the account. I checked a few weeks later, and his profile no longer appeared searchable on the app, which I took as some kind of confirmation, though I never got any specifics. To this day, I don't know if what would have happened had I not spoken up when I did. I don't know why he took that route, why he wouldn't answer me honestly, or why he sat there watching me for those few extra seconds before finally driving off. I've used rideshare apps plenty of times since then, but I always keep the live tracking open the entire ride, without exception. I was visiting a friend in a city I didn't know well, staying at her apartment for a long weekend. On my last night there, we went out to a late dinner and a couple of bars afterward, and by the time we were ready to head back, it was almost 2 a.m. My friend had to work early the next morning, so we decided to take separate rides. I requested my ride first, and a car showed up within a few minutes. The driver was a younger guy, maybe mid-20s, friendly enough when I got in. I gave him my friend's apartment complex address, he confirmed it, and I sat back, honestly a little tired and slightly buzzed from the night. About 10 minutes in, I looked up and didn't recognize anything outside the window. That wasn't necessarily alarming on its own, since I didn't know the city well to begin with. I checked the app anyway, out of habit more than suspicion, and noticed the estimated arrival time had increased significantly. I mentioned this to the driver, and he said something about the app rerouting him due to traffic, which seemed reasonable enough at 2 a.m., even if I couldn't see any actual traffic around us. A few minutes later, the surroundings shifted from what looked like a normal residential area to something much more rural. Fewer buildings, fewer streetlights, trees lining both sides of the road. I felt a genuine spike of nervousness at this point. I asked him directly if this was actually the right way. He said yes, confidently, without offering any further explanation. I pulled up the map on my own phone separately from the app, and the pin marking my destination was clearly nowhere close to the direction we were currently driving. I told him this, showing him my phone screen, and for the first time his tone shifted. He got noticeably defensive, saying he knew the city better than some app. This did not make me feel better. If anything, it made the whole situation feel more wrong. I told him to pull over immediately, that I would find another way home. He didn't respond and didn't slow down. I said it again, louder this time, and he finally said, "We're almost to a good spot to turn around," which struck me as an oddly specific thing to say if he was simply lost. At that point, I called my friend, who thankfully picked up despite the hour, and I stayed on the phone with her describing our surroundings as best I could. I could hear my own voice shaking as I talked, trying to keep myself calm enough to give her useful information. The driver eventually did pull into a gravel lot beside what looked like a closed-down farm stand, completely dark, no other structures visible anywhere nearby. He said this was where he needed to turn the car around. I didn't wait to see if that was true. I got out of the car immediately, standing several feet away in the gravel lot while still on the phone with my friend. The driver sat in the car for a moment, not saying anything, watching me stand there in his headlights. Then, without another word, he backed out of the lot and drove off, leaving me alone on a dark rural road at nearly 2:30 in the morning. My friend called a local cab company for me, and I waited close to 45 minutes for it to arrive, the entire time standing under the one working light near the abandoned farm stand, my phone flashlight aimed at the road in case anything approached. I reported the driver to the app the next day, along with the full route and timeline. I received a message saying they'd investigated and taken action, but no further details were ever given. I never found out where that road actually led, or what would have happened if my friend hadn't answered her phone, or if that gravel lot had been the final stop rather than somewhere he decided to turn around. I work night shifts at a hospital, which means my commute home is almost always well after midnight, usually somewhere between 1 and 3 a.m. Because of the hours, I stopped driving myself home a while back after a couple of close calls with exhaustion behind the wheel and switched to rideshare for the commute instead, treating it as a safety measure more than a convenience. I'd used the same general route home probably close to 200 times by that point. I knew the drive well enough that I could usually tell within the first minute or two if a driver was heading the right direction. This particular night, I finished my shift around 2 a.m., exhausted in the way you only get after a long stretch on your feet dealing with other people's emergencies. I requested my usual ride, and a car pulled up within a couple of minutes. The driver was an older man, quiet, who greeted me politely enough, confirmed my address, and pulled out of the hospital parking lot. For the first several minutes, everything felt completely normal. It wasn't until we approached the turn I usually took, about 6 minutes into the ride, that things started to feel off. He drove straight through the intersection where I normally turned, continuing instead onto a road that led further from my apartment. I mentioned it casually at first, assuming maybe there was road work I wasn't aware of. He said there was construction ahead and that he was taking an alternate route, which felt believable enough in the moment. A few more minutes passed, and we were now clearly in a part of town I never had reason to visit, mostly warehouses and industrial lots, completely empty of other cars or pedestrians at this hour. I checked the app's live route tracking, and just like before, it showed us significantly off the suggested path, with the arrival time now nearly double what it should have been. I asked him again, more pointedly this time, why we were so far off course. He didn't answer right away, and when he did, his response didn't really address the question at all, just a vague comment about getting there soon. Given my job, I deal with high-stress situations fairly often, and I've trained myself over the years to stay calm and think clearly even when my instincts are telling me something is very wrong. I quietly opened my location sharing with a coworker I'd worked alongside that same shift and sent her my live location along with a message explaining what was happening. I told the driver firmly that I needed him to pull over immediately. He slowed the car slightly but didn't fully stop, instead turning down a narrow access road between two large warehouse buildings, dimly lit by a single overhead light near a loading dock. At that point, I stopped being calm about it. I told him loudly that I was getting out of the car right now and that I already had my location shared with someone who knew exactly where I was. He finally brought the car to a full stop, and I got out immediately, standing near the loading dock light while I called my coworker directly. The driver sat in the car for several long seconds, not saying a word, before pulling away and driving back out the way we'd come, disappearing down the access road until his taillights vanished around the corner. My coworker, who only lived about 10 minutes from that industrial area, came to get me herself rather than waiting for me to arrange another rideshare. I filed a report with the rideshare company the next day, including the full trip history and the exact route deviation, and once again received only a vague confirmation that they'd looked into it. I still take rideshare home after night shifts because I genuinely don't have a safer alternative given my hours, but I no longer sit quietly and assume a strange route has an innocent explanation. I speak up the moment something feels off now, and I keep my location shared with someone the entire ride, every single time, without exception. I never did find out why he turned down that access road instead of simply pulling over on the main street when I first asked him to.